Okay, so welcome to Storytime number 70. Um, Today, as our key themes for dressing up and so forth, we had comfort clothing, which there are plenty of dressing gowns and hoodies and onesies around. And we were just discussing that basically the footwear is unanimous in being slippers. Which is wonderful. And the other one was absurd or elaborate hats. And we've got some very beautiful hats on display. Can I see the top view of your hat, Mark? Oh,
yeah.
yes.
Free, a
Feather and
child.
everything. Oh, yeah.
Oh, wait, I have one of those, but it got squished. And so now I don't quite know how I'm meant to re-squish the wires.
Ah.
Oh,
Um,
I'll work it this way.
Elephant trunk.
Because
sideways.
it's a
Bit
the rock
Napoleon
was
Bonaparte for the sideways one.
Yeah, just wear it sideways. Be Napoleon.
Napoleon, definitely.
Oh, yeah.
We saw
Where's your fez,
cat
Gary?
beret
Oh,
specifically.
yeah. Cat beret is nice.
Or
Stupid head. I didn't realise we were allowed to have more than one. I'll bring another one.
fancy.
Oh,
That's a good one. Oh, yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
The Artful Dodger has returned.
Yeah.
No, it's respectable.
Yes,
to
there's a
be
few
out.
options.
gosh,
Very
they're
nice.
all very good hats.
I like that one.
I
Yeah.
I like the top hat.
Top
Yes,
hat,
this
nice.
one we
I haven't
got
got any
on
other
holiday.
hats like that on screen.
This one is an actual like beaver fur or whatever it is they
wow.
made them
Oh
with.
my God.
Yeah.
Right.
Did you buy the top hat?
Yes, we found it in an antiques market in Argentina,
Wow.
Oh,
as you do.
They're hundreds of dollars.
But other topics today, we had some that were because it was quite recently Andrew's birthday. So we have got lawn bowls in this month's edition because lawn bowls is something that Andrew does very well. And he had requested incorrectly biased bowls as a topic anyway. I've also included jetty because Andrew takes a lot of very nice jetty photos, lovely crystal pictures, a historical monument or statue, and some wine. I thought we needed to have some wine. Bowls for us to see in the picture. Fantastic.
It's not the one I
You
use
should have.
though. It's an old wooden bowl that I picked up at an op shop.
Oh, wow.
Very old one.
Oh, it's
Can you hold it up really close to your camera, Andrew?
It's a
Do you
very
know how
old
to
one.
do that?
Oh,
Hold
yeah.
it up really. Oh, yeah.
My grandfather had a set like that.
These are
They
very
might
old,
be your
very old
grandfather's.
wooden ones.
No, you
That's
never
the big
know.
dot.
I don't know what happened to his.
There's the little dot.
It's beautiful.
That's the bias.
So it goes towards that smaller dot.
Yeah. So the little dot is on the inside of your hand when you roll it.
Yeah.
The big dot's on the outside.
Mm-hmm.
When it goes the wrong way, as it happens occasionally, people get the dots mixed up.
Mm-hmm. And then
That's
it
called
goes
the wrong.
curving off away.
Yeah. Instead of curling in, it curls away.
Yeah.
And it's very embarrassing.
Yes. That's what I would do.
Yeah, me too.
So our other topics included acknowledging the illogical or silly nature of what you want, unexpected extreme weather that you're really unprepared for,
That's funny.
We were prepared.
sudden horror of working on a craft and then realizing you've lost your needle, and then a whole lot of things to do with the past coming back. Is sort of polishing of the past, resurgence of the past. So we had old song comebacks, the power of modern editing, matching the new to the old, resurgence of the oldies, cleaning up old recordings, and duets with the past. Who would you like to sing with?
Hello,
Oh,
the
hello,
dog.
Chompy.
Chompy's here.
Very nice to see you.
Face wash.
Oh.
That is lovely. I was kind of hoping Chompy would make an appearance.
But we have a little poem to start on the idea of old things coming back, and it's called Rewind. With new songs from bands long gone and film that's in a time warp, it sometimes seems the oldies have come around to share some tea and talk. Fashion never changes much. It just goes round and round, with skinny jeans and hoodies turned to flowing skirts and flower crowns, as though we're really just on tape, just like the films of old, twisted slightly in the rewind, but not so changed, I'm told. Back in my day doesn't mean much in the scheme of the universe. I think the Earth's seen several rounds of denim jackets and miniskirts. But I know I'm getting older when I pause to look outside and see teens dressed in fashions that I'm pretty sure are from 95.
Yep. Wait till it's from 70s and 60s. And
Oh, we've had them.
And you remember.
We've certainly had I think flares are coming back. And I know that flares were a 70s thing, and they've already been back in my lifetime. We wore flares when I was 13.
Didn't wear flares like the 60s, though.
Not like that. Ours were a bit more moderate, yeah. But I have a feeling that they're going to be wide again.
Yes.
We'll see. Our story today is called Time, a Load of Codswallop. Betty held onto the jetty pole with one hand and did her best to carry the paper crane's bottom into the crevices in the wood with the other. Grandma warned Anae from behind the camera. That doesn't look very secure for Carrie. I know, Betty sighed, but it's how I imagined the photo, with her right in the setting sun, and now I want to make sure we get it right. It was late spring, and based on the expectation set by the rest of the days in the week and the weather forecast, it should have been a mild evening. Instead, a chilly breeze was chopping up the surface of the ocean alongside them, spraying Betty's vampire costume boots with salty mist and threatening to bring rain with it. Still, the sun sank against the horizon like a golden melting sweet, and vibrant orange and pink streaked the clouds over the water behind the jetty's silhouette. It was a perfect opportunity for both Carrie the Paper Crane content creation and some Betty being wise material, which Anae said was Betty's best chance at success, with the rather more difficult reels and stories side of Instagram. Anae said photos might not be sufficient for much longer since everyone was doing videos now. Betty was determined to keep up with the times. She might have been in her 90s, but if she could take part in live-action role-playing and start Carrie the Paper Crane's Instagram account in the first place, then she could follow the trends and remain popular online. And there was something called tic-tac, which sounded ominous, as though you had to hurry up and nail the perfect post before someone else did. That apparently also required video. Betty didn't like the rules changing. She didn't like anything changing, really. But that was what the world did. And for some reason, she wanted to stay on top of it. She could have stayed offline and spent her days knitting with her neighbour Barb and reminiscing about whatever it was that people called the good old days. But Betty wasn't sure she believed in those. Some of the things that had changed had needed to, however alarming change was at the time. And some of the intimidating new things were actually not so bad when you gave them a chance. Of course, some changes, like app updates, the new hotel in her main street, changes to the bus schedule, and changes to the recipe used for ginger nut biscuits, would always be a load of codswallop about which she would infinitely complain. But others, well, for starters, Anay said that some people actually found it entertaining to listen to other people complain online. So even the ginger nuts might have their silver lining in the opportunity for a viral whinge. Anay was not concentrating very well on her role as Betty's photographer and videographer. I miss Zave, she was saying, staring across the grey, sea-worn wood of the jetty at the beauty of the horizon. I want to get back together with Zave. Betty regarded Anay over her vampire glasses, which were red and horn-rimmed. Didn't Zave move to New Zealand, dear? Yes, replied Anay, with a toss of her head. Didn't you say he's dreadful at video calls and you absolutely would never try to do long distance? Anay looked back at her grandmother with a very cross expression. Yes. Well, do you want to move to New Zealand? No, replied Anay, even more crossly. I don't like being in his house. He leaves his socks on the coffee table. He has all these inspirational Zen posters that make me feel judged. Betty raised her eyebrows, adjusting Carrie the paper crane's position against the rich yolk of the sunset. A loud clap of thunder prevented Anay from making a sulky reply, and a gust of wind scooped Carrie the paper crane from her post and flung her into the sea below. Betty peered after her in dismay. Really, she'd known this could happen, but she'd still wanted to put Carrie on the pole, just because that was the picture she'd had in her head on the way here. I got that on video, Anay exclaimed, now excited. Come and narrate what's happening and complain about the weather. Betty turned to look at Anay's phone, which was now pointing in her direction with a light shining on the back. She squinted. The blasted forecast said sunny, she declared. Now we have to rescue Carrie. Anay looked alarmed. Oh, no, Grandma, can't you just fold a new paper crane out of similar paper? No, Betty told her, and the camera firmly. That is Carrie, and her story will not end with a gust of sodding wind. She grabbed her walking frame and set off at what for her was a brisk pace towards one of the two fishermen present further down the jetty. Excuse me, she called out to him from a few meters away. It didn't make sense to go all the way over when he'd have to come back the other way anyhow. Could you please use your net to get my paper crane? The fisherman looked up at her, his eyes glazed. What? There's a paper crane in the water, Betty told him, pointing over the side. Can you get it? The man continued to look confused. Perhaps he didn't know what a paper crane was. He grabbed his net and peered down at the waves. Where? Betty tried to locate Carrie's small, waterlogged, papery form. At first, she thought Carrie had sunk. But then, in the tip of one of the small, choppy waves on the water's surface, she saw the glint of wet, patterned paper. There, she pointed, with the grabby stick that she kept attached to the side of her walker for reaching things. The fisherman scooped at Carrie, and a moment later she was deposited back on the jetty like a very thin, bedraggled fish. Anay and the other fishermen on the jetty applauded. Betty carefully peeled apart Carrie's wings so that they wouldn't stick together. We might have to use the hairdryer on her, she remarked. Grandma, said Anay, I think you should give up on pretty jetty photos with Carrie and start trying different sports and things with her again. It's less dangerous. Another clap of thunder heralded the onset of a downpour, and Betty had to put Carrie in her handbag in some tissues and hurry off back down the jetty to the car, Anay in pursuit. I think we ruled out synchronized swimming, she muttered. It's supposed to be almost summer. She pulled up her vampire hood, which was not remotely waterproof. Absolute codswallop. Anae thought this a good comment on which to end the video. In the car, Betty decided to consult her sports expert and pulled up a video call. It was very early in the morning in Scotland, and Fraser answered Betty's call looking very disgruntled. In the background, James had the ironing board out. "I want to do the ironing," Fraser complained, as he set down his phone on the coffee table, shifting the angle so he was a bit too high up for the camera. His red curls were all on one side, as though he'd slept on wet hair. He had already donned a waistcoat and tie, but had tied the tie in a rather lopsided knot. As Betty watched, he attempted to pour tea while holding both the teapot and the cup and saucer in the air in front of the table, sending the lid of the teapot crashing into the cup and splattering his camera with droplets, which warped his appearance. All in all, Betty thought, Fraser looked very much the part of someone who had been used to having a butler and was now trying very hard not to have a butler by learning a lot of new things at once. "Hello, Betty," said James, as he stubbornly continued to iron. Betty thought she could see why Fraser was not being allowed to do the ironing. Several charred spots on the ironing board suggested that his previous attempts had been rather disastrous. "Hello, James," she replied. Then to Fraser, "Young man, ironing before you can successfully pour tea into the cup without spilling it is like entering the Open Championship before you own a set of golf clubs. Fix your tie and put the cup down to pour. And pour James a cup too, but don't put it on the ironing board." Fraser looked as though he regretted answering the call, but he followed her instructions. Once both the young men had cups of tea, and Fraser looked slightly less as though he'd got dressed in the dark, Betty felt ready to raise her question. "Now, Fraser," she began, "Anae thinks I need to get Carrie Crane doing sports and things again. What haven't I tried that I could give a go at my age?" Fraser looked pleased, having been given a chance to discuss something he wasn't clueless about. "Hang gliding," he proposed. Betty gave him a stern stare. "Very exciting, Fraser, but remember what happened last time I took Carrie up in the air?" "Caber tossing," Fraser went on, undeterred. "Fraser, I may sometimes pretend to be a vampire, but I do not have super strength. My arms have enough trouble lifting jars from the shelf in my kitchen. I will not be able to throw most of a tree." In Fraser's background, James grinned, clearly finding the exchange very entertaining. Fraser considered for a moment. "I know, lawn bowls." Betty frowned. This seemed sensible. She'd seen people who looked her age playing lawn bowls before. "Isn't that a bit normal?" she asked. "Normal?" Fraser seemed to take great offence. "Ordinary. I'll have you know that bowls is an ancient game, and we in Scotland drew up the rules you all play by today. Besides, you were good at the French bull. You might be very good at it." Betty pursed her lips and stuck out her false fangs. "All right then. I suppose it can't do any harm to go down to my local bowls club and see if someone will teach me." She gave Fraser another stern look. "As for you, young man, if you really want to iron, please let James give you some lessons. And pay attention. I shall be paying attention to bowls." She ended the call before Fraser could object. That was one of the rather nifty things about video conversations, Betty felt. You could leave when you'd had the final word without the tediousness of relying on your movement speed. On Wednesday night, Anae filmed Betty making her way into the bowls club with Carrie the paper crane attached to the lapel of her blazer. At the entrance, there was a statue of a man in a suit with a long jacket. Betty stopped to look at him. She didn't have her glasses on to read the plaque, and she was on video, so she decided to improvise. "He looks a bit like Paul McCartney," she said, going up alongside the statue and sticking her head next to his as though posing for a selfie. She turned to talk to the statue. "Have you made a new Beatles song? People on the internet have been saying something like that. It's funny how old things come back. I think there are really only so many kinds of clothes fashions, for example, and they just go round and round. Everybody will be singing Beatles songs again soon, won't they?" "The song is an old thing that's come back," Grandma Renee interjected. "It's not new, they just didn't have the technology to clean up the recording until now. They can fix up video too." Betty looked at the camera. "Is anything really new? I don't think so. New things. Load of Codswallop." And they inspected the statue more closely. "Actually, the plaque says this is supposed to be a Scottish cotton merchant named William Wallace Mitchell, who drew up the rules for bowls in 1864. Betty huffed. "Faces, also sort of recycled every now and again." "You know, Grandma," said Anae, as they made their way inside, "on TikTok, one of the things you can do is add yourself as a duet to someone else's video. Some people there and on YouTube have been adding their own voices to old recordings." Replied Betty. She didn't get to decide what kind of this was, however, because at that moment, a gentleman named Douglas came over to determine whether the two unfamiliar people standing round the club rooms needed assistance, which, of course, they did. Douglas introduced himself, even though he was wearing a name badge, and took them to meet some other people who were relative beginners and choose some bowls to borrow. Betty didn't really understand how to choose, so she just chose ones she could actually pick up. It seemed like a sensible place to start. The bowls that Betty and Anae had selected seemed to them to be rather different to everybody else's. Betty's had an extreme bias, curving so much in their path that they kept going into the rinks next door and irritating other players. Anae's seemed to be the exact opposite and were moving more like 10-pin bowling balls than lawn bowls, frequently going past the jack and into the ditch at the other end. Their fellow bowlers were even more displeased when Betty produced Carrie the Paper Crane and started trying to get photos of her amongst the bowls and attached to her sleeve as she bowled. Douglas said this was disrupting the game and gave Betty a warning. On the whole, however, the bowling people were very encouraging. It wasn't like some sports Betty had tried, where people were inclined to heckle and ooh and ah at bad luck or unlikely outcomes. The other bowlers informed her and Anae that the following week they were having a fancy hats night as a charity fundraiser, and Betty promised to return then with the most elaborate hat she could devise. On the way home, Betty called Fraser again. He looked slightly more prepared for being a person today, his tie properly tied, and, Betty noted with satisfaction, his tea all in his cup and James's cup, and not on the floor or the sofa. The creases in his shirt sleeves were in the wrong places, but the ironing board in the background did not have any new scorch marks, and James was sitting beside Fraser sipping his tea, not up trying to stave off some new disaster. "Hello, boys," Betty greeted them. "I'm going to sing with the Beatles." Both the Scottish and the Australian parties on the call looked at Betty in confusion and moderate alarm. "Grandma," Anae exclaimed, "why didn't you mention to me that you wanted to do that before telling your friends?" "You said that video could be cleaned up nowadays, didn't you, Anae?" Betty went on, ignoring her. "Can you also add things to videos? Because I would like to put myself and Carrie into an old music video, and maybe Broderick could be in it too. There might be some costs, I imagine, but I think getting the Scots paws involved could solve that issue. She winked at Fraser, who promptly started bouncing in his seat and wobbled the sofa, causing James to spill his tea. James cleared his throat. I'm not sure that remaking a Beatles music video with your friend is the best use of the estate marketing budgets, Fraser. Fraser put down his delicate china cup and saucer. He tucked his legs up cross-legged on the couch, swiveled to face James, and put his chin in his hands to give James the sort of look that golden retrievers give their humans when they're holding food. The sort of look that says, I've never been granted a single wish in my entire life, but that one thing you're not supposed to give me would be enough for all the rest of my wishes forever. Please, James, he said. It could be good marketing. We could film bits of the estate along with Broderick. James got a look on his face that resembled the faces golden retrievers humans make when trying to scold them for bad behaviour that is unfortunately also very cute. Whether or not we could film anything on the estate would depend which music video you're trying to match, he pointed out. That's what we have to work out next, Betty told him. And that, apparently, was that. When they got back to Betty's house, Betty and Danae put on their comfort clothes, poured some Shiraz, and settled down to do some research on possible candidate songs and videos that were not animations. And they didn't think it would really work to put her grandma's face and paper crane into one of the windows of the yellow submarine, or insert the blocky animated landscape featured in Come Together. To have a chance of really matching the new with the old, it would have to be a video featuring real people and a location that was either not too difficult to imitate or easy to insert Betty, Carrie, and Broderick into using green screen. Anae did not know how to use all of the blending tricks for film that she knew were possible. Nor did she know how to record and mix music. However, she did work with a marketing team full of media nerds, some of whom would definitely have the required skills, and all of whom would be fascinated to see how Betty's additions to an old piece of media were received by viewers online. While Anae watched various Beatles videos, and Betty hummed to herself in search of additional harmonies or counter-melodies, Betty busied her hands with the beginnings of some hat embellishments. She had amongst her knitting an octopus that she'd made some time ago with the intention of donating it to a raffle. In the end, she'd decided that the creature was a little lopsided and dropped stitch-filled to be a prize. It would, however, make an excellent addition to a sea-themed fancy dress hat if she could sew it on, coiled around the top of a wide-brimmed gardening hat that she rarely wore. She sat the hat in the lap of her furry, duck-patterned hoodie, while Anae tucked her knees up inside a purple jumper that came down to her shins. By the time they finished watching Penny Lane, Betty was sitting in an awkward position, half on her armchair. She had already misplaced her first needle. Unable to locate the potentially bottom-pricking object amongst the folds of her hoodie, Betty had instead fetched a new one and was now trying to sit on her chair without really putting her weight anywhere in case the needle revealed itself in an uncomfortable way. Next on the list of candidate music videos was Strawberry Fields Forever. Oh, I like this one, Betty told Anae, conducting the air. Very weird. I could probably wear my fangs, don't you think? Only during filming, Anae countered, not during singing. Of course not, dear. They would get in the way of my high notes. Don't you think a soprano would add well to this? She hummed a bit. Oh, Codswallop. What, Grandma? I've lost another blasted needle. Don't step anywhere, and don't sit on this chair. I have to find a magnet. She got up gingerly and waddled off to rifle through a kitchen drawer, looking like a human-sized marshmallow leaning on a walking frame. Grandma, Anae swiveled around in her chair without putting any part of herself on the floor. Easy, since her legs were contained in her jumper. What's your goal for this singing with the Beatles thing? What do you want to happen? Like Instagram followers, starting a YouTube channel? Betty clattered loudly in the drawer. I want everyone on the internet to know me and Carrie. Anae pondered this. Are you sure? Remember when you met that Patrick guy and people knew him and he was trying to pretend he was ordinary? Betty pulled out the magnet with an aha, then made her slow way back across the potentially prickly floor to her chair, considering. Load of Codswallop, she said eventually. Being known might be annoying sometimes, I suppose, but I dare say a lot of handy things come out of it as well. For starters, the whole world will know I can sing. Anae pulled a face. Maybe not the whole world. It depends how it goes, whether we market it right. Replied Betty, who was preoccupied with prizing one of the 2 needles off of the magnet. The following Wednesday at the Bowls Club Fancy Hat fundraiser, Betty's head was adorned with knitted coral, the octopus, some seaweed fashioned from fabric scraps, and some real seashells she'd stuck on with hot glue. Her hat filled the vision of anyone standing behind her, so that people kept asking her to move so they could see where their shot had ended up. Anae had bought herself a rubber glove hat, like the one used by the Wallace and Gromit villain penguin to dress up as a chicken. Among the other bowlers were some other wonderful fancy hats, including one adorned with real fruit, like a walking platter, and one very, very tall spire-like hat which couldn't fit through the doors and endangered all the light fittings. The one thing that wasn't going right at all was the weather. The unexpected storm of last week was long gone, but those wishing for sun had got rather more than they'd bargained for, with an unpleasantly dry 40 degrees Celsius. Betty's woolly additions to her hat were not helping her mood out on the green. I'm hot, she'd complain, anytime she was required to move in any way. The fruit platter hat had become a flytrap, and Anae's rubber glove was melting in an unfortunate pattern that made the hand seem to be directing rude gestures at everyone around her. Needless to say, neither of them did much better at the game than the previous week. The other bowlers carried on being encouraging, though, and back under the air conditioner in the club rooms, Betty began to utter other words besides, I'm hot. Instead, she started to tell anyone who would listen about her plan to add her soprano tones to the Beatles' Strawberry Fields Forever. This proved quite interesting to many of the club members. Despite her complaining on the pitch, her photo taking, and her rogue bowls, which ended up in the middle of other games, Betty was quickly becoming well known and well liked by her fellow bowlers. People seemed to be getting quite invested in the idea of her musical venture. Unfortunately, bowling wasn't the only thing disrupted by the sudden heat. Anae had found an empty grassed area with a tree in it, where she thought Betty and Carrie could effectively imitate some of the parts of the old music video. What she hadn't bargained on was the oven-like sun, which was either doing dramatic sunrise, dramatic sunset, or glaringly bright full white lighting, no matter what time of day they went to the field. None of these matched the subdued sunlight in Strawberry Fields Forever at all. My friends can adjust the colours to match, she explained to Betty. but it's a lot harder to match the shadows or lack of them or make it look like you're in cloudy England when it's actually a furnace. I'm hot, replied Betty. I think we might have to put up some shade and rely on a green screen, Anae decided. It will be easier to put you in amongst the action that way anyway. Betty sat down on the seat of her walking frame and refused to move. And Anae decided they would have to delay filming for now and focus on Betty's actual singing, which she could at least do indoors. Somehow, a few weeks later, between Anae, Betty, Fraser, most of the Bowls Club, and a number of Anae's work friends, they had a recording. Betty had, for some reason, said, "Time, load of Codswallop," at one point during filming, and Anae had had her video editing friend include this at the end of the track as a humorous reference to the blending of old and new material. Betty had also worn assorted different outfits across different takes, from her full vampire LARPing costume to her day-to-day pink twin set and coral lipstick. Anae had decided it didn't really matter. Betty herself looked as though she was moving through some sort of time warp. They'd managed to green screen carry the paper crane in on a line so that she hung and moved about in the complex web of strings hanging from the tree. Broderick's glaring was edited in a fashion that resembled something from Alice in Wonderland. All in all, it was a very strange piece of film, but then again, it had been a pretty strange piece of film to start with. Betty's singing, however, was a magnificent addition, her much higher notes weaving in and out of the original melody until it became opera-like, but without being corny. The Bowls Club watched the new music video together on the club room screen the night before it was due to go live on YouTube. Many of them redonning their fancy hats for the occasion and sipping wine. They all agreed to watch again online to get Betty's views up. 1 week after the release of The Crane and Cat's new version of Strawberry Fields Forever, Betty was sitting in her living room, knitting and sipping a cup of tea, when she saw something very strange outside the window. Spread along the footpath, walking towards the main road, were a gaggle of teenagers. That in itself was not unusual. They were laughing and looking at their phones, also not strange. But 3 of them were wearing pale pink twin sets, just like Betty's. And the others had on a colourful array of psychedelic draping garments resembling what the Beatles wore in the video. Betty blinked, sipped her tea, and returned to her knitting. "Fame," she remarked. "Load of Codswallop."
Wonderful. Oh, that's great. When you were describing Betty's hat, I thought, oh, Margaret could make this.
Yeah.
She's knitting one now.
No, I'm not knitting a
Come
hat.
on, Margaret.
Making octopus.
One of the things Charmaine's mentioned about Chompy
Hmm.
is this kind
Who's
of
upside
field
down right now.
thing.
Oh, he's upside down. Oh.
He's doing his upside down tummy in the air thing.
Yeah, he is.
But you know that he's not scared of things that most dogs are scared of, like the vacuum cleaner and so on.
Yeah.
But River is disproportionately scared of some things that really aren't very scary. And they're not, you know, so like, for example, you said, Charmaine, that Chompy wasn't scared of thunder. And River wasn't remotely fazed by that the other time that happened. But today I put out an umbrella, well, you know, terrified.
Really scared of the umbrella.
And sometimes it'll be weird things like, you know, a car which wasn't there before, or we went past the caravan park and there was a bus, like, you know, people use a bus as their home. And she was like, oh, no, that doesn't belong there. Yeah.
It's because it wasn't there before. Like, what's that?
No.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
We definitely the rabbits are very much like that. Like sometimes the neighbors like drilling into the wall, our shared wall, or doing something there. Maybe not drilling, because it's drilling into these walls is not a fun thing to do. But they're doing something with some sort of power tool, and it's going, and they're like, needing us, hey, and then they'll hear some sound that we can't even hear, and they'll be like, they're running into their house and like cowering. We're like, what is it? We can't hear what you're scared of.
Like, why it's scary? It's ghost noises.
What's fearsome and what's
What's fearsome versus
what's fine.
fine.
Because we're probably a bit the same. People are a bit the same,
Yes.
Terrified of, I don't know, spiders.
Yeah.
And then they're 95 and jump out of an aeroplane with a parachute or something.
I will go skydiving, but I cannot deal with it.
And when people are afraid of planes but not cars, and you look at the statistics of death rates, and same thing with like bees versus sharks,
Yeah.
Yeah. Any other topics?
Remembering passwords or passcodes.
Trying to remember your
or combination locks, all those sorts of things.
Weird Christmas.
Not remembering them, to be precise.
You're good at that, Margaret. I don't know how many times she wrote it. She thinks there's 4 numbers for a pin for a card. And so we wrote out every single combination. And so every time she went to the shop, she would try a different combo. But in the end, I gave up. I went online and then changed a pin for her for something. She kept going through it. But,
Up on
runaway decorations.
A la Moby the
Whale. I don't know about Moby the Whale.
Moby the Whale in Australia is a Christmas decoration with a precedent for having strange flash flooding in November and then leaving said Christmas display and sailing down the river. And
That's right.
the recent repeat, and he made the news again.
Yeah, the West End display. That's right. The old brewery display on the river.
That's the one.
I thought you meant runaways, and someone kept putting more and more and more decorations up.
That could be fun too.
I didn't realise they still did the brewery lights.
Yep.
Because the West End brewery's closed down, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. They used to be fun. I used to love them.
Yeah, they haven't even got the tower anymore where they can paint the Premier's colours.
Oh, for the Sandfield? Jeez, talk about opticians dying. What a pity.
Yeah, that's a bit sad.
I think they paint somewhere else now, but I'm not sure which one it is.
They've actually transposed the tradition to keep it alive somewhere else. Now, that could be a theme for a story. Sarah?
What's that?
I'm transposing some traditions so the tradition isn't lost.
Yeah, so something that like can't be done the original way anymore because the place has gone away, and be like
That's
trying
right.
to change it enough to keep it going some other way.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Christmas unicorns.
Christmas unicorns.
If you got a close up of Charmaine's tree, you would understand what she's talking about.
How many unicorns is too many? That's
how many
unicorns
is too many?
Oh no, there's no number. But you could do a guess the number of unicorns game.
That's the dog.
Oh.
Yeah, there's the dog.
He's had a road accident.
In an automobile.
Yes, that's a unicorn. That's a unicorn. Oh, yes.
So unicorns seem to be a theme here.
He's dreaming about Michael Jackson's Thriller, and he's dancing to it.
You should wait for him to like turn over and be the other way and then create a animation of it.
Yeah.
I probably already have that photo, to be honest. Actually, that's probably something you could talk about. I have taken a million photos of Chompy. Every time he's asleep, I'm just like, oh, cute. And then I take like 7 photos of the same position.
Thing. Yes.
How about buying expensive things for your pets? I bought an air conditioner.
You bought
I also had to buy the house to get him too. So
yeah, true.
No, it's not cheap. It's not cheap.
Not cheap.
No.
But
Cost me hundreds of thousands of dollars. I'm in debt.
Both of those things are also nice for you to have a house and to be cool in the hot weather.
So we could do a topic on how expensive pets can actually be. I'm thinking in terms of the cat Muffy that costs nearly as much as a car.
When your pet costs a fortune.
Oh, here's a random idea, little one for the stories. Hugging and how it can actually be harder than you think. Because the height thing reminded me, my nephew is around 15 and he's now like 6 foot. And my mum is, quite short. I'm an average female and she's like up to here on me. And she still like, until a few months ago, would try and reach over his shoulders because that's what she did when he was little. And he's just like, Nana, that doesn't work anymore.
Yeah, I'm too tall.
And sometimes when you go up and you're like, do we go one over, one under?
And another one, Sarah, would be, people popping up from your past. So we had like past things recurring, but people popping up from your past. So I've had a former student contact me, and just in conversation, she's mentioned, she talked about lots of our experience together, but she mentioned that she's 55. I thought, my God, she's 5 years younger than like Mark and Margaret are.
You taught her
and 20 years older than you, and I taught her as a high school student. I had her as a year 12 as well. But really interesting. And
it must be a funny thing when you've been a very like new young teacher and had like year 12s and they leave school like a few years later. It's like, well, that's someone who would just be my friend. Like that age difference isn't really that big, but
not very relevant.
You've taught them, so they always seem like a kid because they're someone you've taught.
So it's really funny about the story, Sarah, because around here, like Andrew's local Christmas pageant was cancelled today. There were all sorts of things, major things, major things that had to be cancelled. And in the morning, it hadn't really got going. We were like, oh, people might be sorry that they've cancelled these things, but no. By 10 o'clock in the morning, you could see, no, that was a good idea. They got it right, big time.
Oh, dear.
I'm going to send, I think this was to the Facebook chat, is on, I think, Friday's warnings. We've got flood watch, fire watch, marine wind warning, downy mildew warning, and sheep graziers warning, all at the same time.
That's a reasonably long list of topics already. Looks like lots of sort of somewhat Christmassy stuff, which will be a little funny in January. But
the New Yeary ones.
Make it sort of New Yeary, Christmassy, and lots of animal stuff. Good.
What Beth mentioned that we're just 2 weeks off the solstice.
So
so
your summer solstice.
Now. So the next one will be quite shortly after, will it?
Yeah. So we could have a reverse solstice. So we normally do the sort of official solstice as your winter solstice. But we could have some kind of acknowledgement of the solstice. 13th is the January story date. If anyone doesn't have that in their calendar, you can pop it in. Before we go, shall we sing a belated happy birthday to Andrew? He got a happy birthday song. I think
we haven't got M.
We haven't got M. Oh
Who's
no!
Who's
Someone
gonna
else
do
is
the
going to have
hoops?
to. Oh,
I think it should be Tegan because she's got a top hat.
got top
Yeah,
hat.
that's
Yes.
smart.
She can do the
Although
hip hip.
Barry's got chaos control. That might be
That's okay.
good for
Well, we know chaos cannot be controlled on a Zoom happy birthday.
Chaps control. Chaos control.
control.
Chaos control.
No.
Happy
birthday
to
you.
Happy
birthday
birthday
to you.
Happy
birthday
birthday.
to Andrew.
Happy
birthday to
you.
Hip hip.
Barry's doing
Hooray!
comics.
Hooray!
Okay, finished
Hooray!
today. It's finished. It's run out. It's
Oh
finished.
no!
Oh,
Run out of
dear.
stuff to cheers with. Oh, hello, River. Hello. Did you like that singing?
Is that him?
Hello.
River. Hello,
Oh.
River Dog.
Is that Andrew? We just add one more thing to the Storytime list,
Yes, yes,
and this is for Mark.
yes.
Celebrity chasey.
Celebrity chasing.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
All right. See ya.
See everyone.
See you, Captain Pete.
Bye.
Bye.
See ya.
Thanks, Sarah.